Let's head straight into our top story this afternoon. Just 2 months after violent standoff along the LAC, the Chinese PLA troops have once again violated the status quo in Eastern Ladakh. Chinese troops attempted to quash the consensus that was arrived at between India and China during diplomatic engagements that took place earlier. The Indian Army has informed the country through a statement, and I quote now, "On the night of 29-30th August 2020, PLA troops violated the previous consensus arrived at during military and diplomatic engagements during the ongoing standoff in Eastern Ladakh and carried out provocative military movements to change the status quo." Indian troops preempted the PLA's activity on the southern bank of Pangong Tso Lake and undertook measures to strengthen our positions and thwart Chinese intentions to unilaterally change facts on ground. That was the Indian Army's statement. The Indian Army is also committed to maintaining peace and tranquility through dialogue, but is also equally determined to protect its territorial integrity, it further added. And now a Brigade Commander level flag meeting is in progress at Chushul to resolve these issues on hand. It's important to note that the major flare-up in Ladakh takes place as the PLA troops have taken position deep into Indian claimed territory at a feature known as Finger 4, cutting off over 50 square kilometers of land that was earlier being patrolled by both sides. Indian and Chinese troops have been engaged in a bitter standoff in several areas along the line of actual control, or the LAC. The formal process of disengagement of troops began on July 6th. Now, for more insights on this developing story, we are being joined by Harsh V. Pant, who is the head of the Observer Research Foundation Strategic Studies Program, and also our principal diplomatic correspondent, Siddhant Sibal. Thank you to both of you for joining us. Now, I'd like to start this discussion by asking you a question, Mr. Pant. Thank you so much, firstly, for joining us. A big development taking place at the LAC, which is being perceived as a clear sign of escalation. China is trying to alter the status quo yet again. What do you make of this new development?
Well, this is quite striking because I think it challenges this notion that normalcy can be expected anytime soon, and also the fact that perhaps Chinese are interested in resolving this problem. It looks as if they are simply escalating this crisis to a point where they get as much leverage over India as possible, right. Not only creating new realities on the ground, but also taking on new territory which has never been in contention before. So right. Clearly with their strengthening of their military postures across the LAC, they want to open up multiple fronts for India, and India should be prepared for a long haul.
Right. Coming to you, Siddhant, you have, of course, been reporting on this story since it broke out on June 15th. What's the latest update that you have for us about the situation at the border?
Well, it looks like there was a certain physical jostling. This is what is coming out, and there was an intrusion by roughly around 25 of the Chinese soldiers that led to the entire development of the situation, the entire incident. But by and large, this is a symptom of a larger problem, a problem of an assertive and an aggressive China. And it looked like, as Harsh pointed out, that China is not very keen on bringing the situation back to its normal situation we have seen in the past, but it looks like the second incident which has happened shows that China will continue to create crisis when it comes to the LAC, line of actual control in Eastern Ladakh. But right now there is high alertness in all the three sectors where India shares border or the line of actual control with China, whether it's the middle, eastern or western sector.
Right. Now, Harsh, I'd like you to weigh in on another very important aspect. We know that high-level talks are currently underway at Chushul, and the Indian Army has clearly thwarted any Chinese intentions to alter the status quo. So tell us, what could be the focus of these talks, and what will be India's strategy going forward in tackling this very aggressive China?
Well, I think India's strategy at the moment to hold as much ground as possible so that the Chinese are not able to create new pressure points across the LAC, and also to try to push Chinese side towards acknowledging that they have to go back to status quo ante, because the problem first and foremost for India is that Chinese are not acknowledging that they have changed the status quo, they've altered the status quo. And I think unless Chinese acknowledge this, and India I think has been very categorical in that respect, that unless China does that, they can cannot expect any movement on any bilateral issue. And as we know, India has been ramping up pressure across the spectrum. In fact, now withdrawing from the military exercise, SCO military exercise in Russia, I think signaling to China very categorically that the ball is in China's court. And I think that's the strategy both the military and diplomacy together are trying to frame for China.
Let's for a moment discuss China's expansionist agenda, which is clearly visible to the world, from its agenda in the South China Sea to now this recent escalation in Eastern Ladakh. So Harsh, can you also weigh in on this rise of a more aggressive China on a global level?
Well, China has in the past never missed an opportunity of vulnerability to expand its geopolitical influence. And it feels at this particular point that the world leadership, that major powers are too inward looking. They are looking at their own internal issues, and it sees an opportunity. Wherever it sees an opportunity, it's expanding. And see what is happening in South China Sea, in East China Sea, in Himalayas, as far as in going and doing a disinformation campaign in Europe. So the canvas is quite wide, and China is exploiting every vulnerability that it can find. And therefore, it's very important for countries who are like-minded to stick together and to frame a cohesive response. Otherwise, I'm afraid we are all going to fall by the wayside one by one.
Right. Siddhant, you also please weigh in on this. What should be India's strategy going forward, and what will come out of these high-level diplomatic talks that are taking place?
Well, when it comes to talks, it doesn't look like anything is happening, given the fact that there have been multiple rounds of talks, both at the diplomatic front and the military front.
Right.
And despite that, this incident has taken place on the night of 29th of August and the 30th of August. What option India has? Well, India has multiple options. India has already implemented some of them when it comes to tech space, when it comes to investment coming from the Chinese. What India would like to see is that the Chinese do not get any share in the large economic pie of India. India being one of the fastest growing economies. Of course, COVID has taken a toll on all the economies, including the Indian economy. In fact, the first quarter numbers of the Indian growth is going to come later this evening. And of course, this will be the month which overlap the lockdown period. So do expect some negative news on that. But by and large, if you look at the options, do expect India to get closer to countries like US, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, more democratic countries. And it looks like there is an alliance system which is the world is going towards. One, of course, led by democratic countries, and another by countries like China, and of course its allies like Pakistan and North Korea.
Right. Coming to you, Harsh, now tell us a little bit about the history of the LAC so that we can broaden our discussion a little bit. It is being perceived as a largely peaceful front, unlike the LOC, of course. So what kind of tensions can we now expect at this border in the future following this recent skirmish?
Well, I think what we are now witnessing is going to be the new normal for quite some time, because unlike in the past, two things have happened. One, China has recognized that it needs to alter the status quo in order to preserve its own interests. And B, India is responding in kind. It's not as if India is sitting back. So clearly the infrastructure building by India, India's military patrolling has become more effective. India is more assertive on its side of the LAC. And that is creating a tension as far as Chinese perception of the LAC is concerned, that if they don't assert today, then tomorrow India might become difficult to browbeat. And I think that's exactly the point that India is trying to make, that even today India cannot be browbeated and India will stand firm for its interests. And I think that's the interesting dynamic between the two rising Asian powers.
Right. My final question to you, Siddhant, what are the economic and strategic consequences of this new conflict for both the countries?
Well, there are regional aspects and there are global aspects. Regional aspects, these are two large countries, two countries which are also big economies, and both the leaders have been talking about there needs to be a resolution of all the issues, and disputes should not become a major escalating points, and it looks like they have become a major escalating point. Second, of course, the global impact. We have seen the world is in churn, particularly amidst the COVID crisis, and while this is happening, we have seen countries growing closer to each other in terms of their ideology, their value system. And as we know that India and along with the Australia, Japan and US are planning Quad meeting, this is something that China will be closely watching. We know the Chinese are also under pressure from the Americans, particularly South China Sea. So it looks like the world is heading towards perhaps a block system where there can be, of course, escalation that that can blow into larger escalating points.
Right. All right, Siddhant, thank you so much for all your inputs and this story. I'd like to take a final question from Harsh. Harsh, India has employed a multi-pronged approach in taking on China at the border and even taken action against Chinese business interests, from apps to Chinese investments in India. These have been so far received as merely symbolic and acts of sending out a message. So will India now use a sterner tactic to deal with China in the future?
Well, I think, India will have to respond across the spectrum. India cannot just rely on one aspect of its relationship. And the message from India seems to be that all aspects are now under reconsideration, that nothing that we took for granted in the past will not be reevaluated in light of what China is doing. Certainly, I think on the border, Indian military will have to assert itself. Indian diplomacy will have to assert itself in framing a coherent response with other nations. And the Indian economy will have to become resilient enough to take on China and Chinese-led economic programs and Chinese trade. Because that's how, as a comprehensive strategy, you can only beat China. Otherwise, we will always be in this phase where we have good trade relations, or we try to have good trade relations, but we end up into these kind of problems at the border. And I think that's what Indian government wants to prevent. And hopefully, with a more robust response coming in over the next few months, India will be able to give this message out loud and clear to China that the ball is in its court.
Right. All right, Harsh, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon on WION, and thank you for all your insights on this debate.